Good morning and welcome. First off, I would like to welcome you to the first Innovation Lightning Round session at the Charleston Conference. This is a new one for us. This is round one. It's entitled Collection Development, Analysis and Assessment, Digital Scholarship, and Scholarly Communication Threads. Pretty much everything, right? Okay. We have 5 fantastic speakers here today, and what we're going to do is we're going to have, each speaker will have 10 minutes for their presentation. And then after the 5 have gone, of course that'll be 50 minutes, we'll have 10 minutes at the end for questions. So if you have one for the first presenters, remember your question because we will come back to them and you'll have a chance to speak to all our presenters at the end. So please help me welcome our presenters, and this should be fun.
Hi, everybody. We weren't sure if we were going to get introduced. So really quick, I'm Tessa Minchew from NC State, and my colleague Virginia from Virginia Martin, she just got married, will be presenting later on. She's from Duke University. We wanted to take a second also to give a shout out to our colleague Megan Kilb in the front row there. She wrote our awesome proceedings article, and she is with UNC Chapel Hill. And also to Teddy Gray, formerly of Duke University, now of Lyrasis, who helped us with the research for the original project. And disclaimer, y'all, we are Southerners, so rapid and concise oral communication is so not our thing. But to keep to our time, we're going to be talking faster than we ever have before, and we're going to be giving a really high-level view of this project, which was very complex. We stopped on a number of occasions and said, wait, are we doing what we think we're doing? I'm not sure. So if you miss anything, don't worry about it. We have a full, very long article coming out in Serials Review, volume 42, number 4. It's not out yet, but it will be soon. And since there's 4 authors on that article, and we have 50 author copies apiece, wink, wink, nudge, nudge, you too could read this wonderful research. So we'll also be open to questions later on today and over email. So I'm going to talk to you a minute about CPCR. This stands for Cost-Per-Cited-Reference. It's a term that we just sort of randomly came up with, and we just love it now. We're very invested in it. We have based this metric off of a unique data set of cited references of our institutionally affiliated authors. So these would be TRLN researchers from Duke, UNC, and Chapel Hill. And we created that data set by trying to wring it out of Web of Science initially, and that didn't work too well, so then we ended up wringing it out of Scopus. That worked a little bit better. More about that later. We did this because we felt like we and everybody else feels like there is a need for quantitative measures that go beyond just CPU and raw usage. And also the greater emphasis on assessment and return on investment is just forcing us all to be more and more creative, which is good, right? It keeps your mind working. During the course of the project, we discovered that CPCR has some pros and cons, like anything else. Some of the pros are that it gives you a quantitative measure of your e-resource's usefulness to your researchers, which is kind of an untapped area. And it provides an additional metric to assist in the evaluation of resources for cancellation. Unfortunately, we are having to do that a little more often than we would like. But some of the drawbacks to it are that it can be artificially high or low depending upon what's going on with a particular title. So you do have to look at this in context. You can't just take it standalone. And it doesn't always connote the value of the actual research cited in the journal. It could just be cited a whole bunch because it's terrible and everybody wants to refute it. So you have to keep that in mind. This is the scary part that I told you about earlier. Crazy town, as Virginia calls it. These are 2 separate diagrams to describe how we wrung this data set out of Scopus. We were just gathering unique cited references from the calendar years 2013 and 2014, and Virginia's going to tell you a little bit more about the deal that we used to grab these from. But one of the things that we encountered is that doing it in Excel, there were limitations that kind of complicated the process a little bit. So that's something to keep in mind. Don't try to memorize these diagrams. Remember, 50 free author copies, and we are happy to share them.
Okay, so we came up with this metric, CPCR, and we wanted to see, is this actually useful to librarians? It was a whole lot of work, and so how do we know if it's actually useful to us? So as acquisitions librarians, we thought we would kind of do a real-world cancellation scenario. As Tessa mentioned, it's something that we have to do a lot more than we like, but that's what we went with. And luckily, or not. We had done a cancellation project with a Springer deal that was shared between the 3 libraries, and so we decided to use CPCR data and compare that to the data we had used for that cancellation project and see how it looked. So the Springer deal that we worked off of, I want to note, is a unique deal. So it is shared by the 3 libraries. We have shared access and ownership, but each library pays for and curates a unique list of titles. So we were aggregating all of the usage from all of the different schools and then the one price paid by each school for that title. So that's a little different than most big deals. So I'm not sure that did affect how we had to evaluate it, but I think that this metric can still be applied to others. So what we found when we compared the data was that CPCR data did support most, but not all of our cancellation decisions. So we were encouraged by that. And we did find, though, that CPCR had the potential to influence decisions, titles that are not immediately clear cancellations or retentions. So those borderline titles where you feel like you could go either way, it provides valuable context, additional context to help you make those decisions. So this is an example title that I wanted to share with you. It's Vert Shock, Megan, is that right? Yeah. We had canceled it for 2016 based off of raw usage and cost per use data. But when we looked at the 2013-2014 data, we found that the CPCR was actually lower than the cost per use, and compared in our data set, this was relatively good CPCR. And we also had the unique cited reference counts in that data set, and we saw that they had increased from 2013 to 2014. So we thought this was an example of a title that possibly could have been saved, at least for a couple of years, to see if that was a trend of better cost per use and more citations or not. And so it might have been something that could have been saved. We did cancel it, so we don't know. We haven't applied this to actual collection decisions. This is all hypothetical, but we went through the motions without canceling. So this is really valuable additional context, but again, it was a whole lot of work. And so what we're trying to figure out right now in our next steps is, can we simplify the process to make it feasible to really make this a regular metric that we use to evaluate our deals? So we want to improve the data collection, cleanup, and storage. We're looking at getting our data directly from the Scopus API rather than doing manual exporting and putting all of which have limits on the number of records and putting it all together, and it's messy. You can get more information out of the API than you can out of the cited reference export and Scopus. So we want to look into doing that, and also to putting it all into an Access database rather than relying on Excel. We also want to look at more years of Springer data, so go back to 2012, 2011, 2010, and also to continue to add year by year. And finally, because this was a unique deal, we'd like to do it with more traditional big deal models, such as the consortium's Wiley deal. So thanks, and if you have any questions, let us know.
Okay, hello everyone. Thank you for coming to this talk today, which will be the first of actually 2 about the HathiTrust. So I'm going to talk about the user needs assessment study that I co-authored with my Illinois colleague, Eleanor Dixon, Angela Courtney from Indiana, and several other people who I'll list at the end of the presentation as well. So first of all, what's the HathiTrust Research Center? We are the research arm of the HathiTrust Digital Library, which many of you may be familiar with, as a digital library of over 14 million digitized texts and materials that over 100 libraries are contributing to. At the HathiTrust Research Center, which is jointly led by University of Illinois and Indiana University, we facilitate researcher access to that digital collection, providing tools and services that allow researchers to gather collections of digitized texts and analyze them, and Robert will talk after me about much more about that aspect. But as we develop the tools and research services for the HTRC, as we call it, we increasingly realize that in order to develop effective services for these scholars, we need to know how they go about their work and learn firsthand from them on how they do large-scale text analysis research. So there have been a number of studies on how humanities scholars engaged with digital collections and digital tools, and as text mining tools have emerged, there have been examinations of how these tools have developed, particularly in response to researchers' needs. And there are fewer studies, though, that examine how scholars engage with textual corpora, which is why we launched our work with an earlier study on how scholars build their collections. So this is built upon a work I did in a previous study for a Mellon Foundation funded project called Workset Creation for Scholarly Analysis. And in that study, we examined how researchers gathered large-scale textual corpora. And we sought to understand how scholars and researchers use digitized books and serials to decide which texts or which parts of the text to include in their own collections for analysis, and then find out how researchers collect digital materials together for those research purposes. And so our findings, we published them in the 2014 iConference and ACES proceedings, and we found that researchers need the ability to create and manipulate collections as reusable data sets and research products, the ability to work with different units of analysis, and the access to highly enriched metadata. And so from those findings, we began to consider in depth researchers' needs and requirements for collecting HathiTrust items together for computational analysis. And we decided we need to learn not only how they create their own collections, but what they did with them after building those collections of corpora. So we launched our study, the HTRC user requirement study, and here's our research goals, as it expands our lens of investigation to learn how researchers use digitized text corpora, apply relevant methods and approaches, and seek out the needed tools for that research. And so from these findings, we're hoping to develop illustrative use cases of text analysis research that help us shape both library services and curricula for training scholars. And also informing other people's digital scholarship centers as they seek to use HTRC resources and services. So it's a qualitative research study. We conducted semi-structured interviews last year and this year with 15 scholars so far, primarily from professional conferences on digital libraries and digital humanities. And so I'll acknowledge up front that the vast majority of our interviewees were from the humanities, so we're still doing more interviews now with social scientists that also use, and other disciplinary areas that use text analysis. But thus far, we've transcribed and coded all this and are finalizing the content analysis. So I'm just going to give a quick overview of our findings. The full analysis will be in the proceedings paper, but these are the key themes that we identified in answer to the question of what are scholars' needs and practices for conducting textual analysis on large text archives. And the key themes that we identified are research practices and use, data acquisition and use, and how they generate and share results. So I'm now going to give a quick overview of each of these themes with some illustrated quotes from the interviews we did. So first, researcher practices and culture. So the research practices that these scholars engaged in as they conduct text analysis research is striking in the contrast with traditional humanities research. They first noted that text analysis gave them the potential to open up new discoveries in long-established fields through, as the first quote says, new perspectives on very old data. And they encounter a number of challenges as they engage in these new research practices, including the complications of research collaborations, especially across institutions, and just engaging in new ways of working that's foreign to humanities scholarship. And as digital scholarship expands, others noted a common platform or common venues are needed to share their data, share their scholarly communications as they advance in text analysis and have these findings. And then a major part of the researchers' work is gathering the data. And as the first quotes highlights, they need access. They need access to the text collections. And then they have various needs on how they facilitate access and acquisition of the data. And as that second quote highlights, there's a definite challenge in interoperability. So there's different digital collections and archives that they're going to, and getting the data from these various collections and databases and doing metadata schema and the different metadata schema with them to get to work with each other can be complicated. And then as they acquire the data, they encounter copyright issues, especially when they use proprietary content, and various other issues that they need to do to manage the data for their research. So where are they actually getting this data? So here's some of the sources that they talked about. So as you can see, it ranges from open content, such as the HathiTrust and Project Gutenberg, to proprietary databases that we're purchasing, JSTOR, English Echo, and ProQuest historical newspapers. And so this highlights a key role that we have as we're taking on, as we're buying our databases, we're also becoming data acquisition providers, which a number of other people have discussed this week. And they use a variety of tools, as you see on the right, for analyzing content, from Zotero to advanced tools like Python, scikit-learn, and D3. And then as they generate and share results, when the interviews described their processes for analyzing text and generating findings, several notable issues came up. First, respondents noted that they didn't need the entire massive text collection, but they often worked with subsets. So they might use individual speeches, paragraphs, encyclopedia articles, or extracted citations from volumes. And then because they only need subsets of the text corpora, several highlighted the need for the ability to navigate through the databases and search in a much more precise and granular way. And in publishing their findings, they found new challenges in that, as that they use hybrid methods for disseminating their work, as they both have the traditional paper and the code and the data sets and contextual corpora that's integral to their research, and how do they disseminate both, and using tools such as GitHub. So our graduate assistant from Gislis, Alex Kinnaman, worked with with Eleanor to develop user personas based on these interviews and the themes. And we identified initially 3 types of users that we may be serving in HTRC. So one is digital project librarians, so somebody who wants flexible, transparent tools like Mallet. Their primary role in the research process is as support staff, and their challenges include accessing the data and matching tools to researchers. The second persona we identified is the faculty member. So this is the experienced researcher using more advanced tools, and their challenges are finding collaborators, accessing the text, building the corpora, and bridging copyright limitations in particular. And then the graduate student is more of a new researcher. So they're using slightly more basic tools than the faculty member, and they want examples of how to do this kind of research. And their main challenges are understanding methods, finding text to use, and working across collections of data. So we're going to be refining these user personas even more, but these are already being used to guide our development of different HTRC services, and they provide very good succinct profiles of the types of users that we're trying to reach as we build out our user base beyond advanced researchers and start building these capacities in our libraries. So looking forward to wrap up, we're currently in the second phase of the study with interviews with social scientists, and we'll analyze and release those findings and future write-ups this spring. But we are incorporating our findings thus far in different phases. So one of the primary phases that I'm involved in, we received an IMLS Laura Bush 21st Century Librarian Grant this past year called Digging Deeper, Reaching Further, where we'll be launching textual workshops for librarians on how to teach text mining tools using the HTRC as an anchor tool and resource. And you can go to the URL to find more information about that project. And then again, we're revising HTRC services and tools, and our user personas will factor into the updated or new functionalities. So these are among the new developments of the HTRC, and we aim to incorporate the feedback and insights we're gaining from these interviews into our tools for most effective use going forward. So this is just, I don't want to repeat Robert, but here's more information on working with the HTRC if you're interested in learning more. And then here's the team, the full team of people who have been working on this project and related projects, both from Illinois and Indiana. Thank you.
Good morning. My name is Robert McDonald. I'm with Indiana University. And today I'm speaking about one of my favorite topics, the HathiTrust Research Center. And I'm going to talk a little bit about a concept we've been playing around with called distant publishing, and tie that into what we think it could be for the Research Center and what we think it could do for scholars. And if you're tweeting today, I hope you'll use @HathiTrust and @McDonald and contribute your ideas to this as well. So just a little bit, we heard some great summaries there from Harriet about the Research Center and what we're doing. How many folks here today are members of HathiTrust Digital Library? Yep, a few. How many of you had heard about the Research Center before today? A few? Great. So we're starting to make some connections, I think. So the key points I'm going to talk about here today in this Innovation Lightning Round, I've got a little bit about the Research Center and the HathiTrust Digital Library growth. I want to talk a little bit about our new non-consumptive use policy that we worked on with a wide array of members over the summer and are just now kind of finalizing. We had great input from lots of different members from the HathiTrust Digital Library to help us work on that. It was led by Eleanor Dixon at Illinois. I'm going to talk a little bit about some of our distant reading methodologies and what that means. The idea of distant publishing, and this is an idea that I started working on a few months ago, and I really think it's got some legs now. And as you'll see, the data sets that we're starting to derive from the digital library that we're publishing through the Research Center are starting to take on their own life, especially with scholars who are able to take them and use them with other tools to create the types of interaction they need for the content. And then I'm going to talk a little bit about how that's how by publishing those large data sets, we're freeing data for larger scale analysis. So we've heard about the HathiTrust Digital Library a little bit this morning and the Research Center. I don't need to cover that again. I like this slide, though. It's cool. A little bit about the repository growth to date, and I know this is a little bit hard to see on the larger screen, but basically you've got a range going from 2 million to 16 million in terms of volumes there on the side, and then underneath it's going from 08 all the way to 2016 up to the present. And as you'll notice, when we started the Research Center back in 09, that's how long we've been working on the Research Center. We're a little over, getting close to the 5 million mark there, something like that. Now you're seeing in 2016, we're all the way over the 14 million mark. And in between, when we've been setting up our services over the last 2 years for the Research Center, basically we've been working with the what we call the open corpus, which is the stuff that's completely out of copyright, which is about 3.7 to 4 million kind of volumes, depending on how you're looking at it. So now, look at the HT repository growth over the last 12 months. Well, what happened there? We went from that, kind of 13 million range there, all the way getting up close to 15 million. Well, part of that was getting more volumes out of escrow that many of the members had with Google that had not been pulled back into HathiTrust yet. Another part of it was seeing other members like the University of Texas add lots of monographs to the collection that they had digitized themselves. So you're seeing the scale of magnitude we went to from when we started this and looking at what we wanted to do with computational analysis. It's basically almost 3 times bigger, and it'll pretty much be 3 times bigger, I think, in the next year or so. So if you look at the Research Center growth over the course of 2014 to 2016, those are the 2 years we've really been in operational mode. That's when we started our portal, had our base services with our data capsule, and started publishing some of our derived workset feature sets. We've got 923 users, 1,100 new users, 1,127 registered users with our services, 130 data capsule users, and these are folks who go in and they get access. Up to now, it's been the 4 million volumes, but pretty soon we'll have that to the whole corpus, and you'll be able to run your own algorithms against the corpus and then pull basically derived data back that we have to review manually now, but then we release it to you. That's one way to go about it. And for our advanced users, and you heard Harriet talk a little bit about that, that's exactly what they want to do. For other people, they need feature sets that they can take with them to use in the tools that they have at hand. We have 257 institutions in terms of those users that are registered with us, and that just gives you a sense of the kind of folks that are working with us. Basically, we work with anyone at a .edu type of situation to give them the base services that we have. And now I'm going to switch gears just a little bit to talk about our non-consumptive use policy. And basically, we started drafting this summer to really be clear on what we were talking about there. And this is basically looking at the HathiTrust Digital Library as one large data set rather than looking at any one book or viewing it or rendering it in that kind of fashion. So that's what I'm talking about when I talk about non-consumptive use of the collection. I also want to mention Franco Moretti at Stanford and his concept of distant reading, because this is what inspired me a little bit about this concept of distant publishing, and that when he's talking about distant reading, he's talking about the same kind of use we're talking about in a lot of ways by looking in aggregate rather than at single volumes. And that's kind of what I wanted to put out here today. If you don't know his work, it's worth checking out. And if you're really into DH kinds of things, you should check out DH Wrestling on Twitter, because they talk a lot about Moretti, and it's absolutely hilarious. So, libraries as publishers. When you look at a place like IU, a place like Michigan, we've got groups working with our university presses and our libraries working on alternate modes of publishing. Ours is called the Office of Scholarly Publishing at Indiana. And when we look at that, one of the things we want to be looking at supporting scholars with, in addition to other types of open access needs, is how we can help them publish the data that they create as they're going about their experiments in ways that can be reused, both to replicate their research as well as to build on over time. And that's what we've seen from the Research Center, is that once we start building these work sets where people want to start and look at things, whether it's a period of literature that we've culled out in a massive way so that you can start your research there, or identifying other kinds of concepts in a data set that we want to derive, that's the kind of thing we want to look at here so that we can publish it in new ways. So my big question for today, and this is mostly to get you to think, because this is what this innovation session I think is a little bit about, how can libraries and university presses, the collaborations that we have, develop data publications that enhance current research methods? Now, I can name you 5 or 6 right now that are working on things kind of like this, and they're all doing one thing or another in that niche kind of realm, but I'm not going to talk in detail because I don't have time today. But I want you to think about those, and I want you to think about this concept of distant publishing. So with us, the distant publishing concept really comes down to the fact that we're taking the original works, we're creating a derived knowledge map that lets you take features from that set with you so that you can go and compute on that in whatever resources you have at your local institution or other shared environments, whether it's some kind of NSF project or something else. And you're able to move that around within the realm of compliance with copyright. That's what we're talking about here, because once we get to the full 14 million volumes, we're talking about using lots of data that comes around that with copyright. With our first work set that basically had the 4 million volumes that we used the extracted features from, we've had 246 downloads. Now, the thing to know about this week is our new extracted feature set, which is brand new, and it's version 1 now, is 13.7 million volumes. And believe me, don't even try to go poke around in this, look at this here. You got to have fiber or be on the internet too if you want to download this work set. You also need to go do some command line stuff to get it. But once you get it, you're able to take that into your own computer environment and start looking at the features that we have there. And I've kind of created a cheat sheet here, the number of volumes, the number of pages, the number of tokens, and all these I could get into much more detail about what type of feature it is and why it's important to the scholar. But that's the thing I want you to go look up and take a look at yourself and think about how it fits with your researchers. So this is my first attempt at a distant publishing kind of definition, publication of a non-consumptive data set outside of any standardized publishing construct, removed by X, and the X is how many times it's removed from the original, degree from the original creator, and openly available because basically we've established that it's being used in a non-consumptive fashion to create new knowledge, and it's not just taking the full book to do something else with, like print or use one-to-one. Think about that, because once we free this up, we can create more generous interfaces. This is the bookworm interface that's integrated now with the HathiTrust Research Center, and we've got all of the 3.7 million text there now. It'll soon be the 13.7 million text. But this has a complete set of APIs where new front ends can be written by scholars to do exactly what they want to do with that API, and it frees them up to do new things that can't happen in just a standardized, integrated interface like we see in most types of information systems, whether it be from vendor or library. So thinking about that, HTRC extracted feature workset opens HT as a data corpus for the research community, and that's what we're looking to do. So with that, I've got my contact info, and I hope you'll talk to me after this to get a sticker from the HathiTrust Research Center. Thank you very much.
Well, good morning. I'm Lisa Macklin, and I'm going to switch gears in a host of different ways. One is I'm not going to have a whole bunch of PowerPoint slides. The one slide you see is the slide that there will be, and that has a URL to a model publishing contract for long-form digital scholarship. And what I'd like to do is kind of give you the context of how this contract came to be and the input that we hope that you can give us on it. So the model publishing contract was actually the result of 2 Mellon grants, one at Emory University, which does not have a press, the other at Indiana University and University of Michigan, both universities with university presses. And we were kind of looking at the question of what really is the future of the monograph, which for those of you who deal with humanities faculty is a really interesting and pressing question. And so what grew out of both of these studies was that there really is very much a high value placed on the long-form scholarship, that long argument that humanists use in order to really do their research and to share it with the world. And what we foresaw was that those long-form digital works would likely be funded by subventions from institutions in some cases, and that there was a value placed on open access distribution. So when we were kind of considering what next steps would be, one of the things we realized is that the current book contracts that we have do not really address either this change in business model or this change in distribution model. And so the Mellon Foundation generously funded another project that is joint between Emory University and the University of Michigan to develop a model publishing contract for long-form digital scholarship, which takes into account this idea of being able to accommodate open access publication. And so when we sat down and really pulled a group of experts together, we included folks from the University of Michigan, some from Emory, we had folks from University of Minnesota Press, we had folks from University of Georgia Press, there were some faculty in the room, there were lawyers in the room, there were lawyer librarians in the room, and we really kind of sat down and spent a day and a half in a nice spring day, talking about a model publishing contract, which was actually a much more interesting discussion than you might think, because it really encapsulated this kind of evolution of scholarship that we're seeing. So the model publishing contract is at the stage where we are on the third version. We have hired an attorney to basically help us draft the contract, and it is days from being released, so we anticipate having it released next week. And what we've structured is basically a 4-page kind of central contract, if you will. And if you've ever seen a book contract, they generally tend to be very long and very legalese. And so we really try to balance the needs of the presses, the needs of the publisher, and the needs of the author. So it is a contract where the author keeps their copyright. It is a contract where they have the option of publishing open access. It's a contract where one of the options is also Creative Commons licenses, which is not something you typically see in a book contract. There's also an emphasis on roles and responsibilities between the author and the publisher. And so one of the ways that we handled that was we have the 4-page kind of core contract and then a series of schedules that handle things such as subventions. So if you have either the institution or an external funder who is funding the production of that particular long-form scholarship, it's a way to have the press be able to calculate what those costs are, and there's also a way to make it clear what the obligations might be from the funder on the press. There's also a schedule around giving credit, because if anyone has worked on digital scholarship projects, you realize that you very much move away from the idea of the typical monograph that is a single authored monograph, sometimes called the monk in the room, where one person is really kind of creating that monograph. And with many of these kind of digital long-form scholarship, there is a host of people that are required with a host of different skills. And so we want to be able to have a way to kind of give credit to all of those folks. So we thought of it as kind of the movie credit idea. Now, I personally have no idea what a key grip does, but I know you need one for a movie because every movie credit has one. And so we kind of took that idea where we really wanted to give credit to the host of people who are often needed to make these digital projects really come to fruition. We also considered hosting and preservation. Preservation is not as easy a question once you've moved from that print book that sits on a library shelf. So who's responsible for hosting and how long? Who's responsible for preservation? Is it the author's institution's library? Is it some consortium? How is that going to be managed? There's also third-party content and permissions. So when you start talking about open access distribution, if any of you have worked with image permissions in the past, you know there can be challenges around that, particularly in the open access arena. So we wanted kind of a set of tools, not just the model publishing contract, but some permission letters as well. And so the model publishing contract, while the focus really was university presses and the long-form digital scholarship, there really is, we think, utility for digital scholarship centers. There is the ability to kind of take some of the clauses out of the contract, perhaps, and use them in other contexts as well. And we're hoping that that more balanced, less legalese language will help facilitate kind of adoption. The model publishing contract will be released with a CC0 license intentionally. The intent is that it be reusable, that it be adaptable. We are going to essentially put it on this website that we have here. I also have postcards. There's some of these postcards by each of the projectors and some up here on the table, and I have some as well. So if you work with humanities faculty who are authors, we want author input because this has to work for authors as well. If you have digital publishing in your institution, we are basically seeking input from the broader kind of scholarly communication community. We're seeking input through January 13th, so you have time. And what we're then going to do is essentially create a revised version that will then be released, as I say, with a CC0 license, so that we hope that it will be another tool in the toolkit for the community, both within the university presses, but also general digital publishing writ large. And so I will be happy to answer questions and give you more information, either after the session or during our question and answer time. Thank you.
Hello, I am Peter Rolla. I am the Director of Acquisitions and Resource Sharing at the University of California, San Diego Library. And of course, all of our PowerPoint presentations have to have a picture of our Dr. Seuss spaceship, the guys of the library. And I think I snuck in here somewhat under false pretenses in an innovation session because, as you can tell from my title, I'm going to be talking about a late 20th century form of technology, the PDF. But hopefully we have an innovative way to deal with them. So brief introduction, and then on my next slide I have some examples of what I'm talking about. This is a fairly infrequent, fairly minor, but always annoying problem that comes up in acquisitions, and that about every 6 months to a year we will get an email from one of our selectors asking us to what we do with one-off PDFs, that they have a title or resource that they want to purchase for the library's collection, and the only form that is available is a single PDF, and and they want to know how we deal with that, and we have never quite figured it out. So these are examples, until now, I suppose I should give that spoiler. These are examples, and again, this is, it's very specialized materials, but it's often materials that support either our collections of distinction or that support very core fields of study on campus. And a couple of examples, Melanesian studies, we have had a very strong collection of Melanesian studies at our library, and obviously Melanesia is in the developing world. The technology for things like publication, like ebooks, is not as developed there as it is in other parts of the world. So sometimes this is the only way that a title would be available. Also oceanography, our library supports the Scripps Institute of Oceanography. So we pretty much, every scrap of paper that has to do with marine sciences, we want. And again, if it's from a developing world, this might be the only way that we can acquire it. Last thing, just last example that I have here, obviously, is we have a strong engineering school, and engineering standards, which used to come as print books, now often come as a PDF. So how do we... Acquiring is easy. We usually just give them a credit card or send them a check. How do we store and manage these types of materials? And lots of imperfect ways to deal with this. We did consider a commercial option, and I'm not even sure if eBury still offers this dash tool. But again, the problem for us with something like this specific tool, is that these are infrequent enough that we don't necessarily want to spend a lot of money on dealing with these one-off PDFs. The eBury Dash tool was available to subscribers of the Academic Complete collection, and our selectors have kind of consistently resisted subscribing to that. So we did look into this, but it was not a perfect option for us. Another imperfect option is throwing these PDFs on a computer in the reference area and having anybody who wants to come look at it, come use that computer. And I will, somewhat ashamed to admit that, speaking of late 20th century technology, the third option is often what we did because it's the easiest. Is print out the PDF, put a call number on it, and put it in the stacks. And then, and I perhaps should have put stars or something around that fourth option, this is what we are deciding to do going forward, and this is where the innovation comes in. We do have a robust digital collections repository of digital material, And we have decided that this is where we are going to store, host, and make available these types of materials. So here is the home page of our digital collections, and up at the top there is the URL if anyone wants to take a look at it. So a little bit about our digital collections. We also call it the DAMS, the Digital Asset Management System. This is a homegrown system. We have a team of developers who work on this. We also have a program in the library, the Digital Library Development Program, that runs and manages this. And so this, in consultation with all the several of the parties involved, we've decided that this would, in fact, be the best solution, is to acquire the PDFs and then host them on our digital collections page. So, of course, nothing is easy. Here are some of the issues that we are working on, need to figure out. Workflows, as you can tell, a homegrown digital asset management system is going to require a lot of work to create, to develop, to maintain, to input. So it's not just one department or program in the library that's involved. Our metadata services program is heavily involved in this. Our ITS program is heavily involved, as well as the digital development. So figuring out who does what at what point is something that we're all going to need to work on. Also, the digital collections website, it's been based on collections. We've been digitizing special collections. I think we may have acquired some collections and put them into our digital asset management system. And we are not really set up yet to ingest a single thing, a single file, a single object. So there are some workflows that need to be created around that. The other big issue then, of course, is the rights management issue. As I said, much of what is in the digital collections are digitized versions of special collections, which we own the rights to, which we can then make available freely and publicly to the world. We don't necessarily own or buy the rights from when we buy a single PDF. So are we able to secure the rights? Who will deal with that? Will that be the selector who wants us to purchase this? Will it be acquisitions department? Will it be the digital library program, development program? So that's something we need to kind of figure out. And again, with all these different departments in the library, who is going to be working on this? If we are able to buy the PDF but not able to make it freely available on the web for everyone in the world, we need to kind of figure out technologically within that digital asset management system, because we haven't turned on any kind of firewalls, any kind of protections. Is there any way we can put something behind a firewall so that our users and patrons locally can use it, but that we are not broadcasting it to the open web? And I think, do I win for shortest? I didn't even get the 5-minute mark from Bobby. Wow. Okay, here's my email address. If anyone has questions or comments that don't get addressed in the question Q&A, then please email me.
I would like to open it up to questions now. We have microphones on each side over here. If you need me to bring a microphone to you, let me know as well, and we'll go from there. Yes? Do we need one for him?
Bob Holly, Wayne State University. My question is for the first presentation. Have you done or ever have you any interest in doing the opposite of determining the works that are highly cited that you don't own, so that you might consider acquiring them? And I expect you haven't, because that would be a whole different process, but I'm still curious.
You want to field that one? Sure.
I think that we have a lot of different things that we've thought about doing with this data set, and it's great to have it, and there's lots of stuff we can do. I think because we do have, not just for the deals, but we have literally everything that was cited by our researchers at each institution each year. So I think that would be a great application. I think we have our hands full with the current project, but that's another way that the data set could be used for making selection decisions. Yeah.
We should write that down. Thank you.
I've considered that to be one good way to session collection, because most of the things that get cited you own, you're doing a good job.
Right.
Perhaps if you have a lot that iron, it's showing the weakness.
Sure.
Yeah, that's a great point. Thank you.
In developing the model licensing agreement, I think that copyright is a little bit different in some European countries than here. And so my question was that in looking at how you put the license together, because humanities faculty have a tendency to publish scholarly works, but also other things. So did you look at Europe, for example, to see if what they're doing might be of some benefit to America, although our copyright laws are a little bit different?
Yeah, the model publishing contract is grounded in U.S. law because it is really intended for American university presses. And we actually have as a preface to the license that that is the law on which it is based. And so the jurisdiction is really going to be state law in most cases, but of course, you would pick the state in which you are in to do that. So it is grounded in U.S. law by its nature. As far as considering copyright laws of other nations, one thing that it does take into account is that, particularly when you're talking about digital scholarship, the distribution is worldwide. And so the rights that are granted and the license that granted is for worldwide distribution. And as you probably know, the way that copyright law works internationally is through treaty. And so the copyright considerations for content that would be included, we basically said that the author would include a list of third-party content, and that could be something they're using as a Creative Commons license, it could be something they're using as a fair use, or it could be something they're getting permissions for. And so we basically took all three of those possibilities into account, but we do ask the author to identify content that is not of their own creation that they're including in the work.
Any other questions? Anyone? Okay, thank you very much for being here this morning, and I'd like to one more round of applause for our presenters here. Thank you.